Churches that consider the police officers outside directing traffic as a security element, you're wrong. They're not part of my security element. Even if they come later on internal to the church when they're not outside, I still do not consider them part of my security element. My security element is going to be a combination of things. Many churches will use off-duty police officers. Well, are they coming to every mass? Because sometimes there's morning and afternoon and nighttime masses in some of your bigger churches. And a lot of times what you'll find is you might have one. Well, how do we augment that? Some churches don't have off-duty police officers. They have civilians that are armed. The thought process then is, okay, well, how good of a shooter are they? Because we all get into this thought process that the people that are there providing security need to be either somewhat in a special operations community on the tier 1 side, or they need to be at a level of a federal air marshal. And the reality is they don't. The reality is we need people that are good at problem solving, that know how to move in a crowd, and know what certain procedures are in place for their particular church. I find oftentimes security doesn't even know what security looks like. They know names. They know that Chris Costa's showing up today, but they don't know what Chris Costa looks like. And that's because there's a revolving group of security at different masses. So the first thing that you need to do is make sure that, if possible, security for that particular mass shows up early and does a quick meet and greet. So if nothing else, I have a face. I have seen this person's face like 30 minutes before, an hour and a half before. There's something recognizable about him, vice it's a guy named Brad, and I've never seen him before. Because what starts to happen is people stand up with firearms. And the time I'm spending trying to figure out who's who, I'm not doing what? Engaging the real asshole here. So time is very, very precious, and time is life. So what we have to look at is make sure, if possible, everybody does a meet and greet. Now, how do we compromise in the event that you can't do that? Because I have some churches that tell me that there's just no way. Sometimes people were running late and they're dropping their kids off or whatever it is. Okay, cool. So security for that day gets a picture. And a picture would be a photograph of every security team member. That way I know. That way I at least have something to go on. Because again, whether you realize it or not, and I talk to many police officers about this, when things happen, people are going to start standing up with firearms that you never knew were there. Because some people are going to be part of security. And that in of itself is extremely important. Meaning I at least need to know who we are, because we're already going to be dealing with the anomaly of guys and gals that are carrying weapons that aren't part of our security that didn't want to tell us. And that's fine. They don't have to. So the reality is that I've already got a slow gear that I'm going to have to spin through when other people start standing up with firearms to protect their family. And then I have to start making quick use of force decisions based on that. So at least if nothing else, I've cut out a chunk of my own security element. I know who they are. How is your security positioned? Do you have security with the kids? And the reason being is because a lot of people think that the pastor is the most valuable. They treat the pastor in many churches as the president of the United States. And I often find that security is grouped or positioned around the pastor. Well, if it's an active shooter, he's just as valuable as everybody else there. If it's a direct threat against a pastor, I get it. Have one or two people, if you really need to, if that's what you believe, close to the pastor in case something happens. But the rest of your security element needs to be spread out. Spread out in a manner that if somebody comes through the back doors or certain other doors that might be mid-church or in the back of the church, that you can respond quickly. If you think you're going to be standing up taking a 25-yard shot, you're wrong. chances are when this element happens or when this situation happens, you're going to be running as fast as you can, swimming through people, probably doing a contact shot. Do you understand trajectory? Because it's just not going to be get up to the person, stick a gun in their side, and engage them. That round, chances are you're running some type of hollow point, right? And yeah, it's a hollow point, but depending upon the body makeup and the situation, you might put a round right through them. So you're going to have to direct that round in a certain manner, whether it's straight down or whether it's up. And then that lends us to believe, well, is the gun the right tool? Do I go with an edged weapon because it's a good close proximity tool? Or do I go hand to gun? Basically meaning that you're going to stop this person or destroy this person with your hands because it is too risky to either pull a blade or to pull a firearm because you'll do just as much damage as he is. So positioning your security team is extremely important. Don't just secure the pastor. If it's an active shooter situation, which we've seen in many churches, I hope the pastor has made his bed. I hope he's good with Jesus. I'd like to think he is. So he becomes one of many at that point that I am protecting. My main goal is to protect everybody else that's in there. If there's a direct threat against a pastor, you should have one guy that's able to take charge of that. Now, generally, who sees the threat coming? A lot of the times it is the pastor. So even better if the pastor's armed. But then again, the pastor's problem is he's in a crowd of people. So at that point, he'd have to come off stage in order to handle that particular problem. So these are just some considerations. I can't cover every little thing on a 10-minute video that you need to take into consideration. But these are just some of the things that you need to consider. Does your security have a color of the day? Do they have a pin of the day that lets me know that they're part of my security element? This goes back to the photograph of who's on security, and this also goes back to the meeting, the face-to-face. But understand this, a lot of times guys will say, well, this is our security element, but today Chris is going to be with his family. Oh, Chris is with his family, and I guarantee Chris is carrying a gun. The issue is you're not out of the woods. You are still part of the security. You're just not part of that main detail. We talked about the children in some churches being on the other side or downstairs. Who's protecting them? Will you allow the teachers to carry? How good does the teacher need to be? Again, are we getting into that tier 1 operator side? Are we getting into that air marshal side? Or when the teacher hears something bad happening, is she going to lock and barricade the door? And then once she locks and barricades the door, how good does she need to be? Because all the children are going to be where? Behind her, in a corner, probably piling up chairs for their safety. She needs to be minute of door. She needs to be good enough to direct fire on a door in the event that the door gets breached. So don't put unrealistic expectations on a person when we don't need them at a certain level. Trust me, nobody's going to come through that door in a hail of gunfire. But it would be better to have a security element down there, because what we would love to use that teacher for, him or her, is a last concentric ring of security. I would much rather know that I have a security officer out there addressing this person immediately, and that teacher is that last concentric ring of security. So these are other things that we need to consider, because oftentimes I find that the children are completely vulnerable in most churches. Oh, don't get me wrong, the pastor's good. He's got 6 guys, 6 security people on him. Well, there's a time and place for that, but not when the church is in session. Security procedures in some cases. Security procedures are that when the pastor says, let us bow our head for a moment of prayer, security doesn't. They keep their eyes open, and then of course they pay attention to things, because that would be a great time for somebody to attack. Well, if that's the case, then you've just ousted your security. So what I would ask is everybody keeps their head up and their eyes open, and you listen. I think God will understand in this case. You listen to what the pastor is saying in prayer, and you go from there.